Hi, Ammar. It looks like you're on the road. How are you?
I am on the road, but I am dedicated to our craft here, Shez.
Let's hope everyone else is as dedicated as we are. So,
No more
Ammar,
clickbait.
yeah, less clickbait. So I thought since overtaking moves has become a hot topic this week, as they seem to periodically at specific races, now will be a great opportunity for us to look back over a few really controversial moves over the last 2 years, and also review the guidelines that have been introduced actually since 2022 with periodic revisions, and then try and work out if the current guidelines as they are today, whether they feel like a fair judgment on the move that we're looking at, and whether or not we think the stewards got it right on the day. Okay, so I've got
Perfect.
7 moves to look at. All right,
Oh my goodness.
7 moves to look at. And I do want to explain the guidelines very quickly before we get into this, right? So, because of the controversies that occurred in 2021, where there were a lot of moves where some were penalised, some weren't penalised, and you were never quite sure what the result was going to be. And I don't think that the stewards often knew what the guideline was, what they could penalise, what they needed to allow as a racing incident, and who needed to get the penalty and how much. So in 2022, a set of racing guidelines were introduced. I've put these up on the screen. So there's one for overtaking on the inside. There's one for overtaking on the outside. And then there's a lesser one for chicanes. But I'm not going to get into that today because none of the moves that I'm going to talk about really involve chicanes. And it gets a bit more complicated. So I want to keep this as simple as possible. But a lot of the comments that we've had over the last 2 videos that we've done are, well, these guidelines aren't visible to us as fans. Like, where can we find them? Well, that's because what the FIA have said is that they wanted to introduce these guidelines initially as a way to give the stewards a guide to what they needed to penalise and how. And then they would subtly get revised over the next 3 or 4 seasons. And then by 2025, when the sporting regulations are updated, if those guidelines have been successful and done the thing that they needed to do in their revised format, they'll put them into statute. So they'll become part of the sporting regulations. But up until then, they've been kind of hidden, and the only reason we know about them is because publications like The Race, Autosport, I've got Planet F1 have done the same thing, GP Blog have done the same thing, Racing 365 have shown them as well. All of them have managed to get hold of them. That's why we know what they are. But we're going to use them today to look at some of these incidents. So, Ammar, let's get into it. I think that's what people say on these kind of videos, aren't they? The first move that we're going to look at, Ammar, is SAINZ versus Piastri, Miami 2024.
Ah,
Okay, I know this is one that you had a lot of views about. Your beloved SAINZ is up against Oscar Piastri. Bloody Piastri! Anyway, let's go.
I mean, yeah, okay.
So this is a shot of the start of the move, right? So this is an onboard with Carlos Sainz. On your left, you've got Oscar Piastri. We're going to head into a left-hander, right? So as you can see, Oscar's covering the inside line. Carlos is going to try and make a move around the outside. So immediately we are talking about around the outside move. So let's take that forward a little bit. So now Sainz has got up ahead of Oscar, right? That's Charles Leclerc up ahead of both of them. We can ignore him for the purposes of this, although never ignore Charles. He's always in the game. This is Carlos approaching the corner. Note you cannot see Oscar at all, right? Right, now we're into the meat of the corner. So we're approaching the apex. And now what we've got is Oscar up alongside Carlos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So Carlos is still there, but just ahead of the apex. Oscar is coming up alongside. And now here we are roughly at the apex, maybe just beyond. And you can see Oscar is now ahead. Carlos is behind, still on the outside. And this is the end result. Oscar stays within track limits. And there's Carlos snaking off onto the runoff and has to stay in position behind. Right, Ammar, tell me. Penalty? No penalty? Who gets it?
So SAINZ did get a penalty for this, correct? Right? He got a 5 second.
Not for this, no.
Not for this? Okay. Yeah, no penalty because, again, in my opinion, they were both there together. I think Carlos was marginally ahead when they reached the apex. And then he basically got pushed off, proverbially speaking, at least. And so he had no choice but to go to the runoff area and kind of go from there. So no penalty.
Should Oscar have had to give that place to Carlos? What do you think? Like, did he push him off the road? Did Carlos deserve more space?
Yes, he did. He did deserve more space on this occasion. Because they were there together at the apex and should have given more space. I mean, I don't know what else to say there, but he did, and so on and so forth. But.
Okay, so are you saying that Carlos Sainz should have been given that position, or that Oscar should have got a penalty for that then? For not giving him space?
No penalty needed for Oscar. Should give up the position, but it's very marginal.
Okay, all right. So let's have a look at what the rules say on this, okay? So this is for overtaking on the outside. I've put the rules up again. So for a driver to be given room when overtaking on the outside, including at the exit of the corner, the overtaking car must have the front axle at least alongside the front axle of the other car at the apex of the corner and to the exit.
Right, but Shez, the problem with that is what do you determine is the appropriate point of the apex?
Well,
is it the start of the apex? Is it? I mean,
no. When the apex
these apexes are not pointed.
The apex,
right?
yeah, they are. The apex is a fixed point. That's by definition, the apex is a fixed point.
So why don't they put a marker there to say this is the marker?
Okay, well maybe they should. But looking at this from
go ahead.
Just looking at this from the onboards and offboards, this is the shot of both of them at the point that I think is the apex, and I think Carlos has his front axle alongside Oscar's. So I think at that point, you're right, he's entitled to some space. But in the next shot, Oscar is ahead. So he's not then able, Carlos has not, whatever you want to say about where the apex is, if he has to stay alongside the driver who is defending to the exit of the corner, then he has failed to do so as per this shot. That for me is cut and dried. So he's not entitled to space on the exit of the corner by the rules as they're written here. The only other thing is that Carlos also needs to have driven in a safe and controlled manner throughout the maneuver, entry, apex, and exit. He has through the entry and apex, but at the exit he's off the road.
Because he had no choice. He had to go.
Yeah, fine. But I would say that point 1, right, that the front axle has to be alongside from the apex to the exit of the corner, wasn't fulfilled, and therefore Carlos wasn't entitled to space on the exit, which is how the stewards called it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's fine as you've explained it. I would just tell you that again, this is where not knowing where the exact point is, right? Like it's much like the DRS line, right? Like if there's a line and you kind of, I don't know why we just don't have that, but
sure,
that's neither here nor there. So I can take it. Like I said, it's very marginal, Shez, because this happens in a matter of split seconds, right? Like, so we kind of forget that, right? But obviously the stewards have access to being able to slow it down and whatnot. Correct. But as a fan, I wouldn't agree with it, but I can see why the rules are the rules.
Correct, but you're also a massive Carlos fan, so there's a little bit of a...
It's of a bias, of course, yeah. But I also said Oscar did not deserve a penalty either. Yeah. So,
but you did, you did think that that Carlos should have had that position for being pushed off.
He should have had that position.
He should have. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is here, as per
Yeah,
these
like the start.
rules, because of the you have to keep your front axle alongside to the exit, it
He
doesn't
didn't do
work.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. Fair enough.
All right. So
Not that controversial.
no,
Also because of who's involved.
indeed, it's going to get more controversial, and I think you're going to
Yes, we're just
see.
ramping up.
I think you might
Stick
see.
around, guys. We've got 6 more of these.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a fairly common thread.
Can get heated here soon.
Maybe. Who
Heated.
knows? Who knows? I don't think it's going to get heated. I think these are all cut and dry. But anyway, let's go. Next one. Okay, now
right.
everyone understands the game. Let's have a look at overtake attempt number 2. Right, this is Norris versus Verstappen, Austria 2024. Okay, now all of the Austria moves are basically in the same corner. So I'm just going to call them number 1 and number 2. So this is number 1. All right, here we go. Shot 1. So this is Lando behind Max. Right, he's coming up behind Max into turn 3. So he's lining up for an overtake. So there's Max on the outside of the corner. Lando's starting to head towards the inside. And you can see in the next shot, there is. He's dived down the inside of the corner. But he hasn't made it anywhere near the apex yet. So here we are approaching the apex again. And you can see Lando's trajectory. You can see the angle of his steering wheel. He's not even started to turn his steering wheel into the corner yet. His wheels are straight. Max is there on the outside, still slightly ahead of him as we're heading towards the corner. Now here we are. There's the apex to our right. Lando's on full lock to the right here into turn 3. And his trajectory is still pointing away from the apex. In fact, the apex doesn't really know where Lando Norris is right now. He has missed that apex by a country mile. Max, we can assume, is still somewhere on the outside of the corner. Lando at the exit ends up in the runoff area, and as we can see from the off-board shot, again, Lando's car doesn't look like it's anywhere near getting close to the apex of that corner, with Max actually looking like he's more turned in than Lando is, even though Lando seems to be ahead at this point. And again, if we fast forward, this is really where I would say the apex of the corner is that little yellow marker, and Lando's nowhere near it. Absolutely just balked it, nowhere near it, and ends up off the track, and ultimately has to give that position back to Max, which he does, gives it back to Max. So, Ammar, what was that Lando's corner? Should he have had to give back that position even though he went off the road? Did he deserve a penalty for doing it? Let's answer that first question first. Did he have to give that position back?
Yes,
Okay.
because based on what we're just talking about, the 3 criteria, right? Axle right alongside each other, correct?
Yep.
And then making it through the end of the corner as well in the same way, right? Just being ahead there, so to speak, and finally being controlled. And clearly, in this case, 2 of the 3 criteria don't get met, right? He's not making the apex, so he's clearly not going to be able to kind of keep the car on track. So obviously that is, it's not racing or overtaking off track or getting an advantage going off track, but it's essentially being able to grab the position by, not being controlled, and therefore he should give it back or get penalized if he does.
Cool. All right. So here we go. Here's the overtaking on the inside rules. So the driver overtaking on the inside must have their front axle at least alongside the mirror of the other car no later than the apex of the corner. And we can see on a few of these shots that actually, yeah, Lando does have his front axle ahead of the mirror of Max Verstappen. So he does fulfill that criteria. In fact, he even gets his car ahead of Max. Fine. But driven in a safe and controlled manner throughout the maneuver. Well, he clearly does not do that because he misses the apex and he ends up in the runoff area. And therefore, he has to give the position back. That is not his corner. I agree with you, Ammar. Correct. That's what Lando did. The stewards actually didn't have to get involved. He gave the position back. Boom. Easy peasy. This game's so simple.
See? It's so easy when, I mean, okay, well, I want to say that just yet because
Right.
a certain fan group will come after me. But
Right.
sure.
Now, this is where it starts to get a bit more fun.
I see.
So, this is Norris versus Verstappen, Austria, same corner, take 2, right? So, let's have a look at the first shot. This is Max. He's still ahead. Lando is going down the inside, right? There's Lando on the inside. We know that we're going into a right-hander. Max on the outside, Lando's on the inside. Here we go. At the apex. Boom. Lando is at the apex. Max is wide of the apex. Lando, at this point, I think we can all clearly see at that yellow marker, he has his front wheels, his front axle ahead of Max. Okay? Here we go to the exit of the corner. Max is now off the track. And Lando is heading to the exit of the corner, still on the track. Lando, you'll have to believe me, stays within track limits for the entirety of that. Max does not. Max then drives back onto the track ahead of Lando. Yep. And does not give that position back. He stays ahead, does not give that position back. Ammar, tell me, two questions here. Number one, should Max have had to give that position back? Number two, should he have got a penalty?
Well, yes, he should have given the position.
Remember, at this point, you don't need to tell me what the stewards actually did. We'll come to that.
Yeah,
but I just want you to say, I just want you to tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, so clearly, again, let's go back to the criteria again. Front axle ahead or side by side, the mirror of the car on the outside or ahead, which Lando kind of fulfills. He also has the car controlled. He's going to be able to make the corner, and Max goes off track. I mean, this is a pretty slam dunk thing. Give the position back or get penalized. And you're going to tell me.
So, okay. So let's just have a little look at what the rules say on this again. So again, these is the overtaking on the inside. We have to do this scientifically, all right? So again, the driver on the inside who's overtaking. So if you're attacking and you're overtaking on the inside, you have to have your front axle ahead going into the corner at the apex, no later than the apex. It has to be ahead of the mirror of the driver that you're overtaking, the defending driver. So I would argue here, Lando does that. So at this point, it's his corner. It also then needs to be driven in a safe and controlled manner throughout the manoeuvre, which includes the entry, apex, and exit. Again, I would argue that he keeps it within track limits, so he does actually do that. This is the third point, right? This is the bit where I think Lando and Max are going to differ, right? So it says without deliberately, and it's deliberately forcing the other car off the track at the exit, which includes leaving a fair and acceptable width for the car being overtaken from the apex to the exit of the corner. Okay, so this is where Max on the radio immediately afterwards says, he didn't leave me room, he pushed me off, right? And Lando's going to say, well, he kept the position by by going off track. So the rules here, it depends how you want to interpret them. Was Lando deliberately trying to force Max off the track or not? Well, this is where we have the cutter update. All right, the cutter update is very, very important. So this is what it says. So George Russell, after cutter, says that all of the drivers agree to this. So I know this is pre-cutter, but all of the drivers agree to this, okay? I think a lot of drivers are aligned that if you are the overtaking car on the inside, rule number one is you have to be able to stay on the circuit. That's going to become a point later, but just leave that in mind, all right? If you're able to stay on the circuit, you are in your right to run the driver wide, as it has been for all of us since go-karting, okay? Right now, there is a line in the regulation that says the inside driver needs to leave room to the guy on the outside from the apex to the exit. And I think that's going to be getting binned off, and I hope it's going to be from this weekend onwards. So that's now the guideline. Okay, all the drivers have agreed, and the FIA have agreed to put that in as an amendment, right? So as the driver on the inside, as long as you make it to the apex and you're able to keep the car on track through apex, entry, apex, and exit, you do not need to leave room for the driver on the outside, right? But this move happened before that ruling came out. The deliberately thing is a point of contention, right? It depends a little bit on steering angle. It depends a little bit on telemetry, and I don't have the shots here to tell you what Lando was trying to do. I don't have them to show you, so I can't make a judgment on the deliberately side of things. Go on, Ammar.
Well, I was going to say that yes. So that at that point, it was a matter of how you interpret the rules, as you say, and of course, I mean, you rule one way, the other side is going to accuse you of bias. That's pretty much it. It's a no-win situation, right? I would just argue that in this case, like even pre-Qatar ruling, right, you're not going to be able to get an overtake done if the idea is that you leave, the space that you're talking about. I mean, Lando can't do anything unless he goes really back into the chicane and just like is like, oh, excuse me, sir, like let me. You can't do that. Like, how are you going to race? So I get that you have to issue updates and clarify, but in reality, he can't do anything at that point. Like, so I don't even understand what that really means. And then you just can't have overtaking anymore.
Yeah,
I'm getting ahead of myself.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but those are the rules as written, and that then leaves a little bit of judgment for the stewards. Did Lando deliberately not leave room for Max on the exit of the corner, and therefore that's why Max is on the outside of the corner? I would not leave you on tenterhooks any longer. Max did not have to give that position back. He did not get a penalty, despite protestations from McLaren. But I think post-Qatar, that wouldn't have been allowed. So I think now, Max would have had to give that position back, and it would have been cut and dried. So I think actually so far of all the moves that we've talked about, they've all been fairly consistent. There are a set of guidelines, and they've been followed. Right? Mm-hmm. I don't think we can complain too much just yet. We're going to move on, though. Let's see what's next. So now we're moving forwards in time. We are now looking at Norris versus Verstappen, Austin 2024.
Yeah.
Do you sense a pattern here, Ammar?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was finding it difficult. Anyway, right. So this is a move that is eerily similar to one that we're going to talk about again a little bit later, right? So this is turn 1 in Austin. They've got off the line. Max, they're approaching the first corner, an uphill, left-handed, essentially hairpin, right? Max is on the inside for this corner. Lando is on the outside, as you can see in this shot here. Right, now we're at the apex. Okay, so this is the apex of the corner. I mean, I take your point, Ammar, about like, you know, you can debate where the apex of the corner is, but ultimately this is really this is very clearly the apex of the corner. And Max has his front axle not just ahead of Lando's front, not just ahead of Lando's mirror, it's ahead of his car, right? So Max is ahead at the apex at this point. What happens on the exit? Max then runs Lando wide, and he stays within track limits. Lando does not stay within track limits. There you go. That's that shot there. And you can see here again from the onboard, Max on the inside, approaching that apex, which I think is that little orange marker there. He's clearly already ahead of Lando. You can see just peeking his front wing on the right-hand side of the shot there. And then on exit, he just has his front tyre in line with the white line on the demarcating track limits. Okay, so Lando has to... Lando is off the track. Max overtakes him and keeps his position. So the question here is, did Max push Lando off? Does he therefore have to give that position back? And if he doesn't, should he get a penalty? Go.
So, I just want to say this was one of my favorite races of last year, because guess who wins in all of this?
Focus.
Anyway, you know what? Max does not need to give him the position, and I know, you're right. He might have pushed him off track. He might have pushed Lando off track, but the reality is that they were headed into that corner with Max slightly ahead, and Lando just like tucked right up to him. So it's a nip and tuck call. And by the way, Shez, this is a quick sidetrack. Every corner is different. This is why I keep going back to what do you define as the apex? Because in this particular corner, compared to the Austria one, right? It's just so different, and they're going uphill.
But they've marked it. They've marked
there's
it.
nuances there,
But they've
right?
marked it with a nice orange label. I mean, but
Oh,
I take your point. But
it's
this is so clearly the apex of that corner.
Yeah, no,
there's no other way you can.
No,
I
I know what the apex is. I don't know what it is in the context of being ahead or being side by side or not. That's what I'm.
This is the apex. Right? If you drew a horizontal line across the apex.
But why don't you just draw it? That's my point. Like, why can't you just draw it so we don't have to do this in
Well, but we don't have to. The stewards have to, and they can.
Correct. And that's why you got to rely on the stewards, and of course we're gonna have complaints one way or another.
Okay.
So I genuinely don't think, and I remember this playing out live too, and this looks slightly different, I would say, when it's played out live too. And so I don't think that Max needed to give it up. Keep in mind, I think this is the race start too, right? So first lap, there's a little bit of, I guess, forgiveness or room for not being so heavy in penalizing drivers. So I would say in this case, no, he did not need to give the position to Lando.
Right. Okay.
Unless he himself, and he was almost off track himself, right?
Yeah.
I know he kept his tires are still on the wide line, but had that changed, then I would have said yes, because he himself went off track, which then means.
Wow. Actually, up until that point, there's nothing about that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, even
it just needs to be safe and controlled.
Exist doesn't mean it. Huh?
It just needs to be safe and controlled to the exit.
Yeah, but it would suggest that it's not controlled, because he wouldn't have made the turn. So it's not controlled.
But staying within track limits to make that corner isn't actually a prerequisite at that point. Okay, so again, let's have a quick look at what the rules say. So the rules say you have to have your front axle at least alongside the mirror of the other car no later than the apex of the corner. I think Max easily fulfills that. Be driven in a safe, controlled manner. Entry, apex, and exit. I think he does that as well. And again, this is the bit without deliberately forcing the other car off track at the exit. So remember, this has come out in the new guidelines, in the revised guidelines after Qatar. That requirement to leave space on the exit for the car being overtaken is no longer there, but it was there in Austin 2024, right? So Max has to be shown, or it has to be demonstrated at least, that Max deliberately tried to force Lando off the track for McLaren to argue that Max has to give that position back. Margin. Correct. Yeah. And this is where the inconsistency comes a little bit, because in the move that we last showed you in Austria, the judgment clearly was that Lando did try and force Max off track, which is why Max didn't have to give that position back. Right? It wasn't judged to be Lando's corner. Whereas here, it's been judged that Max did not try and deliberately force Lando off the track. That's the only conclusion you can come to as to why Max didn't have to give up that position. Right?
Agreed.
But this is, as I say, this is as the rules were written in Austin.
Sure.
So if you make that judgment as the stewards and say that he didn't try and push Lando off the track, then fine. That's his move.
I also think there's going to be a wide margin of error in interpretation, right? Because unless it's blatantly obvious, right, that if Max sort of had his car going straight ahead versus turning in, or even Lando in the other case, right, it's a matter of how you interpret. So there's going to be a bit of a margin for error
Sure,
in
but
even in,
sure, but Ammar,
so
if you're looking at the last move in Austria that we looked at, not the one where Lando ran off into the runoff area. I mean the last move where Max went into the runoff area, and then you look at this one, they look very very similar, and Max has come out best on both occasions. Once because someone else has been judged to be running him off the road, and second because he's been judged as not trying to run somebody else off the road on two moves that look very similar. So you can see why the accusation of inconsistency comes into this.
yeah,
Now I think part of the
absolutely.
reason this was not penalised and Max was not asked to give it back is because it was turn one, lap one. So I think there was a decent amount of leniency given, and that's why. But I think, as we'll come to, if the Qatar revision is applied, then that no longer holds true, right? Okay.
And that's why the Qatar revision came too. I mean, these are the moves that kind of caused
Exactly. Like, yeah, that's done taken the ambiguity out of it completely, and in the right direction, I think. But we'll come to that in a second. Right, so next controversial move. Okay, Ammar, you still with me? You need a break? You okay?
No, no, I'm good, man. Let's go. Let's
All right,
spice it up.
let's spice it up. Right, okay, so this is again Austin last year. We're coming down the back straight towards the left-hander at the end of the long back straight.
Turn 12, yeah.
It's our favourite corner.
It is our corner.
It is our corner. Yeah. Not just because it's a fun place for overtaking, but that's where we go when we visit Austin. So coming down the back straight. Remember, this is a left-hander, so you've got Max on the inside. He's the defending car, and you've got Lando on the outside. He's the overtaking car. That is important because, as I'll come to in a second, there was a right of review, and that becomes part of the argument. So here we go. Lando's now ahead of Max as we're approaching the corner on the outside, turning into the left-hander. And here we go. As we get into the left-hander, actually now what's happened is that Max has got to the apex. And again, I think the apex is demarcated by that lovely little orange blob at the apex of turn 12. Now, he has clearly got his car ahead of Lando. Lando there being on the outside. As we go through, again, there's another clearer shot of Max being ahead at the apex with Lando on the outside, not ahead at the apex. And this is how it all pans out. So at the exit, Max is off the track. Lando is even further off the track. Lando then heads off into the distance and does not give that position back. This is the onboard. Again, you can see Lando attacking on the outside. Max is ahead of him. Then, there we go. There's Lando turning into the corner. Where's Max? There he is. On the exit, as we approach the exit, you can see that Lando's fully on lock, trying to get into the corner. Max is heading for somewhere in North Dakota. I think it doesn't look like he's actually trying to make the exit, and as we know in a second, neither of them do. So, question: was Lando's move legit? Was he allowed to do what he did and not give the position back, or should he have had to give that position back? Should he have been penalised? Should Max have been penalised for going off the road in defence? Over to you.
Lando should not have given that position back and should not have been penalized. As we've been talking about, one of the three criteria, the third one is make the corner and be doing it in a controlled manner. Clearly, Max didn't do that. As you said, his car was pointing at North Dakota at the end of that apex, or whatever, however you want to describe that. So he had no intention of making the corner. And clearly, Shez, you need to add a little bit more nuance, right? Because you can see as they're coming off the back straight, Lando is ahead. And so now it's a matter of strategizing how you're going to do the overtake, right? So they're taking two different angles, but clearly Max does not want to let Lando by, and that's just simply it. And you can see that they're both off track, by the way. So what previously held true in Max's favor at turn one does not hold water here, quite simply. it's a slam dunk. Give no need to give the position back for Lando if and sort of move on. I don't
Okay.
know about penalizing
So
Max though,
okay,
unless you're gonna like
yeah. So
say
yeah. So this is the question here, right? This is viewed by the stewards as an overtaking maneuver by Lando. Okay,
sure
right? And Lando is the one that has to fulfill all the criteria, not Max, right?
he did, except for
Well,
the apex part. Is that what you're gonna
it's
argue?
not
Like
just the apex, though, is it? So they're going to say, so being ahead at the apex. This is what the rules say. So that the front axle, at least alongside the front axle of the other car, at the apex of the corner and to the exit. Well, you can see here in this shot that's not happened. So he's not made it ahead of Max at the apex of the corner.
he was
And
ahead
he
of
then
Max
has to drive in a safe and controlled manner throughout the maneuver, entry, apex, and exit, which he fails to do in the same way that Carlos did not fulfill that criteria in Miami in 2024. The move that we looked at the beginning of this, right?
There's one slight problem with this, Shez.
Tell me.
Lando's already ahead, reaching
So,
the apex before Max
so
is. So now, unless you're going to argue an angle, then it just makes no sense.
well, so I think by the letter of the rules, if it's overtaking on the outside, remember the fourth part of this is that he has to be able to make the corner within the track limits. Lando does. The overtaking car has to. So
Right.
he hasn't fulfilled the criteria of being ahead at the apex. He hasn't done that. He has driven it in a safe and controlled manner. So I don't think safe and controlled means that you have to stay in track limits. You just need to not be in a leery oversteer. But you have to be able to make the corner within track limits, which he fails to do. So by the letter of the law, he's not fulfilled the criteria. But this was an interesting one because McLaren did raise the right of review, and their argument was that as they were approaching the corner, actually Max was the attacking driver because Lando
Correct.
was ahead.
Yep.
Right? And if that's what you're going to use as your argument here, you can see from this shot that it's true. You've got Lando ahead of Max. Then Max is still ahead, but you can argue that he, as you say, wasn't driving in a safe and controlled manner to the exit, and did not leave enough space for Lando on the exit. He deliberately drove him off the road. So you could argue that, but again, it would be open to interpretation a little bit. So the stewards did give Lando a penalty here, didn't they? I think they offered the opportunity to give the place back, although they're not allowed to ask him to give the place back. That just has to be sorted out amongst themselves. Lando didn't give the place back and got given a 5-second penalty, which cost him, I think, a podium in the end that day.
I wasn't paying attention after P1 and P2.
Okay, so again, on this one, I think the penalty was correct.
Yeah, so
was correct. Like it wasn't.
Yeah,
his
but
corner.
Shez, this is the problem. This is, and you'll enjoy this. This is one of those cases where you come back and say the surgery was successful, but the patient died. Right? That's what this is. Right?
Mate,
I think McLaren are 100% correct to argue. I would argue that the overtake was already done way before they reached the apex. So Norris is no longer the overtaker. So I don't understand what that means, because then what this does is essentially you can just get to push off the driver off the track, and that's all you got to do. I mean, Max wasn't really trying to overtake him either at that point.
Correct.
So,
yeah. Well, but this is what
gonna give me a lot of love.
This is what the George revision is about after Qatar, right? Is that you have to? Well, but he's saying what
I agree.
you want. Right?
I agree.
And all of the drivers agreed to it, as per George, GPDA director at the time, that you have to be able to stay on the circuit if you're trying to. If you're overtaking on the inside, if you want to use that as the rule here, that Max was overtaking, he still has to stay on the track to be allowed.
What that also does, and this is something that you argued, right, is this strategy by Max, although highly effective in winning additional points or defending a championship, makes for really bad racing, because while we would love to dissect each and every corner overtake, you can't keep after a certain point, it's just going to get so technical. You're just going to have to be fighting it out in the stewards room, and then having Christian Horner put out printouts like the ones we're doing right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I agree.
it's not fun.
But I do think
It's not
it is an effective way for Max to go racing, because actually he does
Sure.
the thing that he knows that you're allowed to do. But I do think the rules as they've been revised have closed these loopholes down to a point where Max can't just do that. He can't just aim for the apex and hope for the best, no matter what he does at the exit. It's not just
Shez, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, ask me.
If they had gotten together, I know they did in Austria, but if they had gotten together at that corner, let's just say they crash out, who's to blame for that? In this particular corner,
it would probably be Lando for.
So it would be Lando's fault,
yeah,
even though
for
he
not
was
claiming.
the one
Well, he didn't claim the corner.
Right, but okay. I mean, I think one of these days there's going to be some driver that throws it in there just because they have nothing to lose to it. They're like, okay, whatever.
But it won't work for them anymore, I don't think.
Sure.
But anyway,
okay.
we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think we've got, how many have we got more? We've got two more.
Mega episode today.
Yeah. Okay, so this is move number 6. This is Norris versus Verstappen, Mexico 2024. This is the one that everyone wants to know about. Here we go. Right, so this is the approach to turn 4. Max is ahead, Lando's behind. Lando's going for the overtake on the outside. Right? So here we go. There's Max on the inside, Lando on the outside. You're again going to have to ignore Charles Leclerc in front of us. Although I think that might have been Carlos Sainz, actually.
That's probably Carlos.
But what you can see here is the Ferrari looks like it's pretty much at the apex. Lando on the outside is clearly ahead of Max's front wing that you can see on the inside, just to the left of the screen where it says mobile. Right?
Yep.
And there we go. That's us at the exit of the corner. Max is now on the left-hand side, staying within track limits. Let's be honest, he is staying within track limits. But Lando is now being forced wide, so he's now edging off the track and eventually ends up completely off the track. Now he then stays ahead of Max and carries on racing, and we have another incident a bit further down the road, which I'm not going to get into, but Lando's trying to go for a move around the outside. Yep. And and ends up off the track and does not give the position back. So should he have had to give the position back?
Yes. He went off track. It's just, I mean, in this case, it's pretty simple. Yes, he fulfills the other criteria. He's got his front axle ahead of Max pretty well going into that corner. I think there's something to do with the Ferrari kind of being there that causes some of these issues. So I suppose you could argue mitigating factors in terms of just the Ferrari being right there, and I don't know, maybe McLaren argue. I can't remember what they did in this particular corner, but yeah, the fact that Lando went off so far, and I agree he might have got pushed off, but that didn't seem to apply in Austin, right? So it shouldn't apply here either.
Okay, so here's the rules again, right? So this is a question, I think, this really does come down to the apex, right? And who owns the corner. So the overtaking driver must have their front axle at least alongside the front axle of the other car at the apex of the corner and to the exit. The argument here is going to be, did Max crowd him off the road? But the question then becomes, well, if Lando,
I mean,
Ammar, this is where the question arises, and I haven't got an answer to this in this set of rules. Does that front axle alongside at the apex mean that the driver on the outside overtaking is entitled to room on the exit, and therefore he's not given it, and that's why they've given? Yeah. That's why they've given it.
That's probably, and then I was wondering what other mitigating circumstances would there, including lap 1. But I will say, Shez, so you also lose a little bit in not watching this live, because if you see it in motion, that would probably clarify some of these things. But yeah, I would agree. I can see now why that would be the case. I also think, again, that Ferrari being ahead, there's Probably. Look, Shez, I think one of the reasons why you're seeing drivers go off track and all of these things is because there are stakes involved. I mean, these are all crashes in the making. These are all of these are crashes in the making, right? I mean, I know in Austria they did get together eventually. It was going to happen at some point, right? Um, but I think that the idea of going off track to take evasive action versus the idea of going off track because the other guy sort of didn't give enough room and you still wanted to keep the position, that's fascinating to me. And I don't know how you judge that race in and out because it's all a matter of marginal interpretation.
But if we go back to the SAINZ PIASTRI move in Miami, because that's the precedent here, isn't it? Like SAINZ didn't keep ahead. What was I thought actually marginally ahead at the apex, but didn't stay alongside
Well, I
Oscar
mean,
to the exit, and that's why he didn't get that corner. Why he wasn't given that
Lando
corner
has managed
back.
to stay.
But Lando also, if you look at this
I mean,
picture,
he did, yeah.
he doesn't keep his front axle alongside Max's front axle to the exit of the corner, and therefore completes the move off the track. So actually, if you're really going to look at the letter of the law, and maybe I'm looking at this wrong, like you guys can come back at me if you want to. Maybe Lando should have had to give that position back. Maybe the stewards were wrong.
I think the letter of the law would suggest that he would need to give it back. The only question is mitigating circumstances. And then also, how do you judge this corner versus the other corner? Because you kind of have to look at it
you
in the
have to look
sense
at
that
the
there's the
apex,
next corner to be made. But Shez, I would say that the overtake was slightly done too, right? Because in that shot where they're right behind, I think Carlos, right? Lando is way ahead. It's not even a matter of front axle. He's sort of halfway ahead of Max too.
Yep, agree with that.
So at that point, it's like, okay, I kind of have this move done, and now this guy's and if you look at it, so this I'm going to say something controversial that'll get Max fans all riled up. Well, there we go. If it were another driver, Shez, they would have let Lando by because they've effectively lost the position at that point. But it is Max's driving style, his aggressive nature of not giving it up whenever, and I have zero problems with that. By the way, like that's who Max is. That's how we've known him to be. No problem at all. But essentially, at that point, you're leaving your competitor no choice, and that's been the Max MO, right? I'm just going to block you off the corner,
but I think
you have no choice.
Sure, but I think if you're going to be consistent about this, then
I agree.
Then Piastri should have had to give that position to SAINZ in Miami.
I agree with you, but again, those things are not how they played out, right? Like, I mean, and again,
it's true. But
Max is the common denominator in a lot of these things. I mean, if you bring up 2021, then it's going to be even more. But my point is, yes, look, 9 out of 10 times that driver would realize that they can't keep going into it. Like, it's just not going to work. Like, and I get that you're fighting, but I can also see why it's a bit of a toss-up. Like,
so I think with this one, I think my final judgment, my final judgment on this.
Fine. There you go. Shez said it.
Is that, look, Lando did what he needed to do at the apex of the corner, right? He was ahead of Max at the apex, even though he was on the outside. So he's done that to claim the corner as his own. So therefore, Max needs to leave him space on the exit. That is where I think he doesn't do it, and you can see here. In this, on the exit, Max has left so little room that Lando has nowhere else to go but go off the track. So therefore, Max hasn't fulfilled his obligation in that move, which is to provide space on the exit for the overtaking car who has claimed the corner at the apex. I think that is why Lando did not have to give that position back and why he did not get a penalty.
I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, fine. So, final one. Let's bring this bang up to date. This is Saudi Arabia 2025, first corner, lap 1, Oscar versus Max. So again, the context of this is straight off the start line. Oscar starts from position 2, Max starts from position 1. So I think it's been judged that Oscar was overtaking Max. That's how the stewards have looked at it, and if you look at the stewards ruling afterwards, that's how they judged it. So that's what we're going to do as well. So this is us going into the first corner. As you can see, it's a left-hander, and you've got Oscar on the inside, Max on the outside. So this is an overtaking maneuver on the inside. And here we are at the apex. I know there's been a bunch of different shots. So I'm going to give you this shot, and then I'm going to give you this shot. So both shots which show that at the apex of the corner, there is a neck and neck, so front axle to front axle, or potentially the Oscar is ever so slightly ahead depending on which angle you look at, but certainly front axle to front axle. Okay, and then this is us again at the apex. The apex is that little orange marker on the left hand side there, and you can see that we're front axle to front axle, right? And there we have it again. This is Max on the outside, front axle to front axle, but just have a look at where Max's mirror is. Clearly that mirror is behind Oscar's front axle. Yep. Here we are at the exit. There is Oscar on the left hand side. On the inside of the corner there is Max heading to the runoff area, not going to make the corner. And as we know, Oscar managed to keep it within track limits, and Max did not. So this is the first move that we can talk about where the Qatar revisions apply. Okay, so we're going to use those revisions here to judge this move. So overtaking on the inside. So we're saying that Oscar was overtaking on the inside. The driver overtaking must have their front axle at least alongside the mirror of the other car no later than the apex of the corner. And as I think we've shown you here in this shot, Oscar's front axle was ahead of Max's mirror. So at that point, going into the apex, he has the corner. Okay. Again, even if you look at the later shot, this is from Oscar's onboard, their front axle to front axle, you have to believe me, the mirror is behind the front axle. So therefore, Oscar's front axle is still ahead of Max's mirror. And therefore, by the letter of the rules, that's his corner. So what does he have to do? He has to drive it in a safe and controlled manner throughout the maneuver, which includes the entry, apex, and exit, which he has done. The third point that had been the rule up until now, until after Qatar, was that the driver overtaking mustn't deliberately force the other car off the track. But now that's no longer the point, because as per what George told us after Qatar, all the drivers are aligned. If you're the overtaking car on the inside rule, number one is that you have to be able to stay on the circuit, which we talked about before. But if you're able to stay on the circuit, which Oscar is able to do, you are in your right to run the driver wide, as it has been for all of us since go-karting. So, did Oscar stay on track? Yes. Did Max stay on track? No.
No.
Did Oscar have to give Max space on the outside? Well, it depends on whether or not he was ahead at the apex, i.e., did he have his front axle in line or ahead of Max's mirror? Yes, he did. So therefore, he is under zero obligation to give Max any space on the exit of the corner. Therefore, it's his corner. Max did not have that corner. So that's what the rules say. Ammar, I've done this backwards. What do you think? The problem is,
it's fine. It's fine.
Because we've already dissected
we've
this.
already made our
Exactly.
opinion well known about
So I'll just finish. So I think by the letter of the law, by the guidelines that we've got with the revision that we had after Qatar, the right.
It's a slam dunk. It's a slam dunk.
The right decision was made. This is probably the easiest one out of all of the ones that we've had.
Shocking.
But there you go. Ammar.
It's just, I think that there's nothing to argue about this. There's nothing to honestly diagnose even more. I mean, this is about, if the real penalty that is a head scratcher in this particular race is the one that Liam Lawson got, which is mind blowing really. But we're not able to talk about that because this is the first time in years that Max Verstappen has actually lost a corner. This is as simple as that. And the more time that has passed from this race, and the more comments I've seen, I've just seen a lot of angry and upset Max fans. And I think the reality is they're not willing to accept that Max would ever make a mistake because he has been nothing but flawless the last 4 years. So he was not there first. And even though Christian Horner came up with a cheeky printout, and I think you showed one of those shots. That is not the right angle, guys. That is not. That is, if you have to look at this perpendicular, that angle that Christian Horner came with is like, I think, at like a 45, 50 degree shot.
I think the main
even there it doesn't.
I think
make sense.
the main problem is that he's taken that shot way past the apex, and that's
way past the apex
so,
too. That's
so
the other.
Unless he was trying to say that Max was ahead going into the apex of turn 2, perhaps that's what he was trying to do. Anyway, I think that should draw a line under this one in terms of whether or not it was actually a penalty or not. We've looked through 7 different moves. Tell us what you guys think. You've got all of the information in front of you. We've given you still shots. We've given you the rules, the guidelines, the updates, everything. Tell us what you think. Please like, please subscribe. Please leave us your comments below. We will read every single one. I am waiting with bated breath to hear what everyone has to say on this one. As usual, we'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many as we possibly can, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.